we have the pleasure to welcome Dr. Brovkin. Dr. Brovkin, I hope you're doing well.
Thank you.
And you see these recent events, the fall
Yes,
of Assad government,
yes,
and we saw no motivation from the Syrian army to defend. And it was, for many people, shock and surprise that how quickly these rebels take over the capital city.
yes.
For many, this event was not an organic event. So what are your thoughts on the recent fall of Syrian government?
Yes, it's a very complex issue because I was listening very attentively to reports from Russian talk shows and discussions and trying to understand how they perceive it. And what I heard seems to be plausible, and I will explain it to you how they view it. But then there is another theory, and I want to explain that to you too. So, what the Russians said was that they interviewed the generals and the officers who served in Syria in the 2015, who are quite familiar with the scene on the ground. And what they said was that there was a lot of corruption. And corruption meaning that not on a grand scale, like, people get millions, but that the officers and enlisted men were so poor, that there was so little money, that they were, they were trying to kind of privatize their little neighborhood. If anything passes through, they would charge a little bit of money. I think one of the officers said that they were getting like $7, and I don't remember, is it a day or is it a month? But just to give you an example, during the Soviet times, Soviet soldiers, this was like before the collapse of the Soviet Union, they were paid 3 rubles a month, like equivalent of $3 a month. So they would have their porridge to eat, and their uniform, and that's it. There'd be no pay whatsoever. And maybe the Syrian army was like that. It was just drafted soldiers who had no monetary whatsoever. And so the rumors was that when the rebels were coming, they offered $400 a person to let them through. And this
Okay.
was like that's a lot of money. In other words, if your choice is that you fight and you might die, or you get 400, which is like 10 times more than what your monthly pay, that could be one of the reasons. That sounds convincing enough. Now, the second reason, of course, is that the Assad regime did not make an effort, what the Russians urged him to do the
Mhm.
kind of a reconciliation of various communities. I mean that Putin's idea was when he went in, is that you can isolate the terrorists by undercutting their grassroots support. So for that, you need the support of the people. If you satisfy their needs, then they wouldn't need the terrorists. But Assad didn't do this. And this is also comes from the Russian officers' reports, is that they said that all the people who fought with them were fired and dismissed in later years. The question is why? Well, the answer is that he put all Alawite people around him. And it was like a tribal dictatorship. He relied only on his own men from his own tribe,
Mhm.
regardless of whether they were uh, honorable officers loyal to Syria and a kind of a impartial reconciliation of all. This is probably the reason, because Alawites are a minority. And the majority
Yes.
is Sunni Muslims. So you can't run a country if you don't reach out to them, if you don't promote them, if you don't make them equal. Let me just again give you a comparison. In Russia, you can have Tatars in very, very high places. Like the director of the central bank is a Tatar woman. Not that it matters that much. The whole point, it doesn't matter. But that's when you have real equality, when it does not matter. And when you have only Alawites, and they are holding all the positions of authority, and they have friends and connections to the family, that ain't good. That's not something that can last. Now, third reason is that U.S. sanctions. I mean, the U.S., without invitation, stole Syrian oil and were robbing the country of the only resource it had, and on top of it, imposed sanctions. How do you think anybody can survive in this? They had no money, they had no resources. The only thing they had was their oil, and even that was taken away from them. So, oh no, for these reasons, it is obvious that something had to happen. Finally,
Mm.
why did the Russians and the Iranians didn't support them? And there was an expectation. If you watch the news day by day, there was an expectation when the rebels reached Hama. There was an expectation that the Russians and the Iranians will come in and everything would stabilize. And they did. They did come in. This is what I heard from the Russian news shows. The Iranians came in, the Russians bombed the advancing columns, and for the moment, it looked like they're going to stop it. But
Okay.
then the Russians and the Iranians stopped. Why did they stop? Because they realized that the Syrian army does not want to fight. And so they thought, well, the Iranians, I heard the report, just turned around and went back. They didn't want to fight somebody else's war for them. They were willing to help, but not to actually do the fighting. So it seems like the regime collapsed quicker than anybody thought. But I would imagine that Mr. Putin probably realized that this is untenable, that it just cannot last. We just don't know when it's going to fall, but it was going to fall. And he was very nice to offer Assad asylum. And in fact, his family went ahead. So Putin must have known that if he's sending his family ahead, things are not looking good. So
Okay.
Putin must have known like a few days, maybe even earlier,
Mm.
when the preparations were made for his family to come, that you're not sending your family if you think you're okay. That seems to be the indicator.
Yeah, so what I'm understanding from your explanation that Assad is in a way self-responsible because he failed to, modernize the army, train the army, and, create a reconciliatory, atmosphere where the different factions of the society are well integrated.
Absolutely.
So,
I think his
mhm,
best, what he absolutely had to do
mhm,
was to establish contact with the majority, which is the Sunni population and the Kurds, because the Kurds have I mean, like he could have offered them like so special status or something, or
mhm,
guaranteed autonomy, or make changes to the constitution or whatever, so that they feel comfortable that this is their country too, and they will get a big share of the oil which is in their ancestral land. But he didn't do any of it.
yeah,
And that means how can you run a country when there are
yeah.
parts of the country that are not recognizing you?
Yeah, and the only reason he survived for, over a decade because of the support of Russia and Iran.
Yes.
So let me move
Yes.
ahead. So what do you think? How the collapse of the Syrian government going to impact on the Russian and Iran's strategic objectives in the region?
Yes, I would say it like this. That in the short term, this is of course a fade, I mean, a blow to the Russians, not so much to the Russians as it is for the Iranians, because the Russians have their bases and so far they are okay. And even if they're not okay, even if they have to withdraw, this is not catastrophic for Russia. But for Iran, it is a big blow because it does interrupt their connection to Hezbollah. So this is in the short term.
Hmm.
However, uh, the biggest problem for Russia, I think, is the relationship with Turkey, because it seems like Erdogan kind of stabbed in the back here, acted behind the back of Putin, didn't tell him what was going on, and
Hmm.
unleashed, terrorists or patriots, whatever you want to call them, that are loyal to him, that overran the country. Maybe he didn't even count on it. Maybe this happened too much and he didn't even expect it to be. But this will complicate relationship with Russia. And I actually think it is going to have consequences. Putin will not just forget it and turn away, not immediately, but, and I don't know what he's going to do. I can only know what I would do if Mr. Putin asked my advice. I would establish really good relations with Kurds, because
Yeah.
Kurds is the only force that can do some serious problems for Erdogan. Now,
So
this is
let,
short
let, let,
term.
let
Yeah,
me ask you a question here. So what do you think the role of Turkey? Because more recently we saw Erdogan was in Kazan in the BRICS conference, and still we see the relationship between both are very complicated. So
very
what's going
complicated.
on there?
Yeah, very complicated. I can tell you, I see exactly what Erdogan is up to, and this is clear. This is his program from many years. What
Hmm.
Erdogan wants is to take over the entire Kurdish area of Syria and
Hmm.
create a buffer state, or maybe even eventually annex it to Turkey. And that's not even that. He thinks that he could control the Kurds by occupying the entire Syrian Kurdistan. But also there's another objective, which is, and there the United States does support him, is to build a pipeline from Doha through the Kurdistan to the Mediterranean coast. And that way the Europeans would be able to get the Middle East oil and gas bypassing Russia. And Erdogan would be the king, because he will be controlling the major oil lines, one from Azerbaijan, one from Middle East, and one from Russia. So this is what he's up to. He wants to be the kingmaker of oil routes in the Middle East. And he
Okay.
already has two of those. So that's what he's up to. Whether he will succeed or not, I don't know. My view of this is this. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not an expert on this, but I have a feeling that he may choke on the Kurds. The
Okay.
Kurds are very, very resilient people. And despite all the pressure that they've been subjected to within Turkey, they keep on the dream of independent Kurdistan. Moreover, the Kurds that are in Syria and in Iraq, now they have the experience of 10 years of de facto independence.
Okay.
They're running their country. I mean, the 900 Americans don't do anything there, just sitting there giving advice, but they're essentially running themselves. And I don't think they will take it easily, just, because Erdogan wants to annex them. They will resist, and it's a big question whether whether Erdogan will be able to absorb them all. So long term, it's a problem for Erdogan.
Yeah. The Western media also, posing in a way that the Iran and Russia, because they are involved in their domestic issues, and especially the way Russia is busy in Ukraine. So it is kind of, in a way, inability to manage the situation, and they give up on Assad.
No,
So
no, no.
how
This is
you
all
react to
wrong.
that?
This is all wrong. No, Russia has enough resources to take care of its interests. And if you, the forces that were there in 2015, they did a great job with very, very small forces. Russia has enough personnel and enough Spetsnaz and enough missiles to protect its interest in Syria. But at this point, there's nobody to work with. And in fact, we shall see how relationship will work out with the new administration and the Russians. I wouldn't be surprised if they establish normal relations just like Taliban, because what these people see is that Russia was defending Syrian statehood. Now, it is connected with Assad regime, fine, but it's not just Assad, it's Syria as a country. And Russia has been supporting it for decades, not just yesterday. And what Lavrov is saying all the time is that we need to keep Syria as an entity, as a country, as a state, rather than let it disintegrate into the small tribal neighborhoods like Libya or like Yugoslavia. So that may be of interest to the new rulers of Syria, that they want to collect all these pieces and create a normal state. So this seems to be, where the Russians come from. Now, I still want to say the most important thing. It's the
Mhm.
Israeli factor. The Israelis, of course, show already that they want to destroy Syria. Russia wants to preserve Syria. Israelis want to destroy Syria. They have designs on Golan Heights. Now they talk about Greater Israel, blah, 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 maybe all the way to Damascus. You know, what I think may happen is that the Israelis would find that Assad was a pretty good neighbor compared to the new government that they're getting. These people are hot-headed. They believe in revolution. They believe in radical change. They are inspired by Islam. I think the Israelis may regret that they thought that Assad's regime would fall and then everything will be fine. They would just proceed on their offensive all the way to Iran. No, I think Israelis are delusional. If they think that a country of 10 million people can actually fight the war and win against these 20 million Syrians and 80 million Iranians, well armed. It's not a backward country. This is a pretty modern country which has its scientists and engineers and everything. Israelis, I think, are walking into a trap. And moreover, it's so strange that they're doing it because they actually risk if Iranians lose, they're not going to lose Iran. There's nobody's going to occupy Iran and install something there. It's impossible. Even Americans you would need to send 500,000 troops to do that. So Iranians lose to have a bloody nose. But Israelis, if they lose, they risk the state of Israel as such. And that is, I think, totally irresponsible on the part of Netanyahu to risk the survival of Israel by getting into this very dangerous escalation by overrunning Syria and confronting Iran.
Yeah, but at the moment, it looks like everything is working for them and they are happy with the situation. And since the fall of, the Syrian government, they have, I think, 300 or more than 300 airstrikes in and around, the capital city.
Yes, yes, I
Oh,
know. But you see, this is all, it doesn't matter in the long term. You
yeah,
see, what matters is that Israeli army cannot fight a long war because it's a citizens army. These people serve and then they want to come home and it's not a professional small army. It's a and if they engaged in patrolling Gaza and if they engaged in fighting Hezbollah and now they're going to have to occupy and keep forces in Syria and they're still thinking of fighting Iran, they will overstretch their resources. And this already begins to feel Israeli economy is in a free fall. There's no tourism. They don't have any oil. They
mhm.
spend too much. There's discontent in Israeli society that is growing. Yeah, they feel good. Okay, we're gonna be number one. We're gonna hit this, hit that. But at the end of the day, people have to return to their jobs, and otherwise the economy is going to stop. And they take too much. The Israeli Netanyahu is taking too many responsibilities that may overstretch Israeli capacity to conduct these wars. And this is in the conditions when the major powers are not doing anything. They're just silent,
Yeah.
such as Egypt. I mean, Egypt, 90 million people and a capable army, nothing. The Gulf states, they have pretty powerful professional armies trained with modern weaponry. They're doing nothing. So, Israel is playing with fire and it may blow up in its face.
So with all these unfolding, events, there can be a humanitarian crisis as well, where a lot of, displaced people heading towards Europe or neighboring countries. So you think this will be another crisis in the region?
Well, it's already a crisis. It's already a redrawing of the map. And a lot depends actually on the United States and on Trump administration. From what Trump said, a little bit that he said, it seems like he's not interested in the imperial agenda of Biden and Obama and previous Democratic administrations. So he actually said that's not our fight, and he may leave Syria. It depends. If he just drops the Kurds and leaves, this may actually be bad because then the Turks would feel their hands untied and would invade, and there'll be more war. But if something unthinkable happens, and that is Trump and Putin cooperate, as they did earlier against the terrorists, and if they handle the situation in Syria together, well, with restoring normal governance and putting serious sort of conditions to the new administration that they should do this, this, and that, and then there'll be no war. We will not bomb you if you restore normal life. There is a chance that Putin and Trump together can put Syria back together again, and then U.S. will be able to constrain Israel, and Putin may be able to constrain Erdogan, and things in the most optimistic scenario, things may work out fine. It all now depends on what Trump actually is going to do in his Middle East policy.
Dr. Brockin, thank you very much for your kind explanation and your expertise. We will continue talking about all these crucial issues till our next video. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So